Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Andertons TV, and my special guest today is none other than Troy Van Leeuwen, all the way from somewhere much sunnier than I am at the moment. And I'm so pleased to have you on. Big fan of your work, and thank you very much for joining us. Tell us, come on, where are you and just how warm is it at the moment?
Okay, well, I'm in Los Angeles, California. And as sunny as it looks, it's probably about 68 degrees. So, which is, pretty normal for this time of year, in Southern California.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Cheers, man.
I'm really interested in you I've personally been familiar with what you've been doing going back to the sort of when you joined Queens of the Stone Age. I've kind of read up a little bit about what you were doing before that. And I'm kind of interested in, you definitely aren't going for a sort of a mainstream approach towards your guitar tone and stylistically how you play. I think you're trying to be your own person on that. And can we sort of dive back into when you were learning to play guitar and what it was about your musical influences then that you think of created that?
I started playing when I was about 13. And at the time, FM radio in Southern California was all like rock music, so like AC/DC, Zeppelin, Hendrix, Black Sabbath, the Pretenders, stuff like that. I was listening to, and that sort of got me in the door. I was kind of just like everybody else, learning pentatonic scales and not going too far into lessons. I didn't have enough of a attention span for lessons and all that kind of stuff. So I would listen to records and the radio, and I would tape songs off the radio if I liked them, and I'd try to learn them, So it was all by ear, most of my learning. So, that's how I kind of got in the door. But as I started listening to more interesting music and, I started getting into Bowie and T-Rex and then into Bauhaus and so there's a lot of, there's a lot of like classic rock in my veins. That's where it kind of starts. But I got into like the way that Robert Fripp plays. There's a certain kind of offness about his playing, and so I would incorporate elements of that and like any kind of like post-punk alternative playing, like Johnny Marr from the Smiths. It's just I would just kind of get more into that style of playing and kind of reinvent what I think rock and roll is. So basically, that's kind of where it starts.
I know from listening to Robert Fripp talking and interviewing a guy called Jacko who's played with him a lot recently. I can see a little bit now. He talks about creating soundscapes rather than necessarily just a straight melody or a tune or something like that. It's a soundscape.
Sure.
Do you think that was rubbing off that early influence, and you coming towards your guitar tone and going, there's more than just chords here? There's a whole.
Yeah. I would say that I kind of have been reinventing what I think of reinventing myself since like the early 90s. And I really would like to think of myself as a player who wants to serve the song first, with whatever part or whatever melody or whatever sound I want to get, and then from there, self-expression is super important to me too. So it just depends on the song and what it calls for, but I like to play outside of the lines. I like to keep mistakes and then repeat them and then make them a part. You know what I mean? So to me, you know, and I mentioned Bauhaus earlier, like Daniel Ash's playing has always been intriguing to me because it sounds like he's approaching the guitar like in a way that's maybe he doesn't like, he probably didn't study theory, I guess, you know. So there's notes that are like dissonant and kind of like emote sort of like an offness. I like to use stuff like that to create tension and then a release. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of creative ways for me to express myself with a guitar. I mean, I've been playing it for long enough that if I should be bored of it by now, but I'm not. I keep getting into it. I keep loving it. So it's cool. I'm a lifer.
Did you go straight from school into following a career as a guitar player, or was there a time when you were, you know, balancing a job and the band? And
well, I mean, you know, when you're living in Los Angeles, I'm going to change the angle of this because the sun is kind of, there we go. I mean, it's nice to have sunlight, but I need to be bathing in it. I do still think of myself as a vampire from time to time. I'm sorry, what was that question?
We were talking about just leaving school and whether you went straight to being a guitar player.
Well, being a musician in Los Angeles, you know, during that time, you know, the early 90s and stuff, you had to have a job because, you know, I didn't really have a career. I was playing in bands and trying to get deals and, you know, doing little bits of touring here and there and making no money at it. So it wasn't until, you know, I mean, I tried to go to, you know, city college and stuff like that. And I learned how to play cello for a minute and piano and I studied a little bit of art, but ultimately I just, you know, I just toughed it out for a long time and hooked up with the right people at, you know, and that's sort of how yeah. So, but I didn't have a career in mind other than playing music. If that's the question.
What were you playing then as well? Were you know, guitar in terms gear wise? Had you started to experiment with, you know, different instrument stuff, or were you playing? You know, did you have a Strat or a Tele like everybody else, or?
So initially the first really good guitar I got was a Gibson Les Paul Deluxe, and that was the only guitar I played for a long time. And I always was curious of, you know, having different tones like a Telecaster and you know, a Strat, but I just couldn't afford it. So until a little bit later, but I basically had a Les Paul Deluxe and a Fender Twin, a 70s Fender Twin Silverface, and a few pedals, you know, and I just kept that rig for as long as I could until I could afford something else. But, you know, it's funny because, you know, we're talking about this guitar here, and to me, it never entered my mind that I'd be into playing an offset guitar like this at that time. But the truth is, the very first guitar I got was a Tisco Del Rey.
Oh, cool!
And it was beat up. It was, I think I got it for $60, and it was all I can get at that time, all I could afford, and I played it until it basically fell apart. And back then, I didn't know anybody who could fix guitars. You know, otherwise I would have had it fixed and kept it forever. But it was an offset shape. It was much like this one, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's what brings me kind of back to this guitar, because it kind of reminds me of my youth. And, you know, we're talking about California and how sunny it is and how the sun keeps trying to blind me up on camera. I'm just going to let it go. Yeah, so, yeah, I guess, I you know, we could talk about that too. You know, the reason, you know, I have another Jazzmaster that's in candy oxblood, and it's a beautiful dark color, and it's a great guitar that looks wonderful on stage, and it's basically the same guitar as this, with a you know, with the traditional rosewood fingerboard. And when Fender approached me to do another color, first of all, I was ecstatic. You know, I was very happy about that. That, you know, they would want me to do more. So this is kind of the 180 difference. You know, it's the same guitar, but when you add different elements of, like, you know, this fingerboard, the maple fingerboard, definitely has a better attack. Like, not a better. It has a brighter attack, and aesthetically, it kind of does a few things for me. It reminds me of my youth before I played music. You know, I was the kid going to the beach and boogie boarding and riding BMX bikes, and you know, summertime was you know, magical. And I also spent a lot of time in the desert. And so this is kind of an homage to my youth, being a California kid, and also an homage to the origins of the Queens of the Stone Age. You know, when you go to Joshua Tree, there's colors like this. The sunset looks like this sometimes, you know. So it's kind of all those things, like, you know, wrapped into one package for me.
Did it feel like?
What's that?
I mean, I was going to say. I mean, I can't in my own mind come to just believe that it's almost 20 years ago that you joined Queens of the Stone Age.
I know.
and I kind of, in my head, I still think of it as almost like a new band, which is like. I mean, we're pretty much the same age, and I guess there's a certain part of me that just goes, "Where's the last 20 years gone? I can't work it out." But yeah. I sort of, you know, I remember the Foo Fighters kind of being like, "Wow, it's big, it's the new band," and then like Queens kind of came along not that long after, and it just, I don't know, and then you just go, and then 20 years have gone by, and you go like, "Whoa!" Does that freak you out as well sometimes?
Sure, you put it very well, because I was thinking about it the other day too, and I mean, I was a fan of the band before I joined the band, so there's that extra, you know, 22 years, you know, like the first record came out, 22 years ago, and I loved that record so much. I played it all the time, and to me, it reminds me of being being on the road, because when you're on the road, I think I was in a van, you know, on tour somewhere when I heard that record. And when you're in a van and you're there with your bros, and you're like, let's listen to this record, and then, you know, an hour and a half or an hour passes by, and then, you know, you've driven 200 miles, you know, depending on how fast you're going. So those things kind of stick with you, and like you really discover like what music you're into, because you're just stuck, you know, in a van listening hard. And so and that's the one thing about being a touring musician, like time is this very strange thing, and sometimes it sits still forever if you're sitting in an airport waiting to get on a plane. And then sometimes, like you're saying, 20 years goes by and you're like, what happened? So yeah, I think I've experienced the same thing.
You know, I mean, I remember feeling like, I'm not sure if I had the first Queen's album. I think my first album was probably the one that they released just before you joined.
Rated R.
I remember thinking, this is a new sound. This is not just regurgitating, rock from a previous decade. And
Sure.
and I wonder. I always thought that the guitar playing and the general construction of the songs in there, that they just were interesting to listen to. I know in the early days it's sort of written that you and Josh were quite secretive about the gear that you were using to try and get those sounds. I mean, was that just part of the mystique, or were you genuinely hoping that no one would copy you?
Well, I'll say that I've kind of lightened up on what I do in the band as far as like what gear I use, but Josh definitely has his uniqueness, and for me, part of it is like your fingers. Your fingers do what they do, no matter what, and that's very true for him, and it's very true for me. It's when I learned that, it was when we were doing Lullabies to Paralyze, and Billy Gibbons was so gracious to come down and play on that record, and he spent a couple days with us, and he literally, it didn't matter what guitar you gave him, what amp or what pedal. I don't think he even used pedals, but he would just plug in and it sounded like Billy Gibbons, and there was just no doubt about it. So there's a bit of that, like you can't really like copy people, but I think, in the spirit of like magicians, you don't want to give away your tricks. And I think that's what Josh's philosophy is. But mine is, it's not what you play, it's what you play. And so I'm pretty free with, with what I use, and I'm always changing. So it's kind of like there's never really like one set kind of signal chain, and I change amps all the time. But the funny thing is, I have learned that this guitar, the Jazzmaster, has become part of my signature with kind of everything I do right now, because it's a super unique and versatile guitar. I can get so many tones out of this thing. I mean, I can get the brightest, shrillest, like angular, ear shredding rhythm sound out of this, this bridge pickup, and I can get the warmest, creamiest, like bluesiest, tone from the bass circuit too. So I need that especially for Queens, because over the years, we were I was kind of, when I first joined Queens, I was kind of there to replicate some of the stuff that Josh was doing. And then, so over the years, I've been able to bring my own flavor to the band. And so my role now is, I'm a texture guy, I'm a color guy, and I'm an ambient guy. So that's what this guitar kind of does. It does all of that. And it takes lower tuning very well because it's got a longer scale.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons why I kind of stick with this guitar.
You've stuck with a very vintage spec on that guitar. I mean, you've changed the pickup switching a little bit, simplified that a little bit, but everything about the radius and the pickups and the trem system, and it's very vintage. Is that, did you have old Jazzmasters prior to doing the signature, and just sort of, was a love affair just with the old ones from before?
I've never owned a vintage Jazzmaster, but the one guitar that I did get, which was a newer release, but I'm trying to think if it's called the I can't think of the actual title, but about 5 years ago, Fender released like the 62 Telly and like all the really, really specifically good years of all the Fender guitars. with those original colors.
Yeah.
And one of them was a 65 Jazzmaster in Aztec Gold. And so even down to the finish where it was like the kind of paint that they used back then, I mean, it was exactly what I liked about Jazzmaster. That spec on the neck, those pickups. And so I just, when they asked me to do my signature model, I said, just put that stuff in this guitar with this switch and this color,
Yeah.
with a matching headstock. And so that's what I did.
I can't see close up. Have you gone for the saddles on yours, like the old Mustang saddles, or are they the?
That's the other thing. The bridge on this is a Mustang bridge.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the other things that I could never kind of get around with the original bridges on the Jazzmasters, because the way I hit, with my pick, I would say it's a bit aggressive, and the strings would always flop off of those little grooves.
Yeah.
And I'd be in the middle of a song having to pick it, go like, oh, I gotta put it back in the saddle. So that's why I picked the Mustang bridge, because it handles that strike of mine a little bit better,
I love that copper color. I think it's stunning, and the vibe of the black inlays on the maple board gives it a real kind of 70s sort of
super like funky 70s to me.
Yeah.
And the thing that we really worked on with the color, it's basically a Fender copper. And I gave him a couple of examples of because the thing that people may or may not know is that guitars and cars, they all shared the same colors. The guitars from the 50s and 60s, especially, if you look at a seafoam green, that was the same color on a 50s Chevrolet Bel Air. So to me, I was looking for copper colors, from that era, and I found this. I think it was a 58 Corvette that had this copper color. And so I kind of took that as an example of what I would, another, sort of California dream in a 60 or 58 Corvette, with a topless, convertible. But what I did add was a little bit of I like that Aztec gold too.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a hint of, it's mostly copper, but there's a hint of gold and a hint of orange too. So again, it reminds me of the sunset, in Joshua Tree.
It is a beautiful color. I always think back to I read a biography of or an autobiography of George Fullerton, and saying that the way he used to convince Leo Fender to do different colors back in the day was to just go to the car spray place over the road from where we were making them and just get the colors from there and spray guitars up, and so all the original Fender colors are just classic American car colors from there.
Yeah, my dad was an auto painter. He used to do custom stuff, and that's also an homage to him, because I would spend days at the shop watching him paint, especially cars from that era, because that's where he grew up. And he turned me on to Chuck Berry when I was probably 4 years old, so it's probably his fault.
Oh, it's great, man. I should say to the people watching that the reason we don't have one of Troy's new guitars in stock now is because you keep buying them all faster than they can come in. So not you as in Troy, I mean you as in the audience. That would be bad if you were buying all your own guitars back.
I'm very chuffed about that, I have to say.
That's a very British thing to say. Where did you learn? You must have learnt that over here.
I definitely have. I've been over there so many times that it just rubs off on me.
So come on, once the lead goes out of the guitar and it's going into pedals and guitar amplifiers and stuff, and you've talked about creating textures and ambient tones and stuff, is it now a massive pedal board, like the size of a door?
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I say that because, you know, ultimately when you pick up a guitar and you want to get something out of it, you got to make sure it sounds good just plugging straight into the amp, which this does. But you know, I've kind of done this to myself over the years. You know, I end up playing through every pedal that you can think of, and so yeah, I kind of like I try to keep it, you know, smaller than a door. But inevitably, you know, especially when I'm recording, you know, I gotta have every, you know, like I gotta have every color on my palette. So yeah, I use a lot. I use a lot of stuff.
If there was a fly rig and the band said, look, we got to travel light here, the board can be this big, what 4 pedals are on it? And you don't have to name specific brands or whatever, but what would they be? Types of pedal?
I don't mind naming brands. I usually have to have some whammy pedal.
Okay.
An old Digitech whammy pedal if possible. I'm always using upper and lower octaves. I don't really like lean on using it in the Tom Morello sense, you know, where and he made it such an iconic sound on that first Rage Against the Machine record. And I love that, but I try to like, you know, maybe that's a tip of the hat to him because he's kind of the first guy that's been known for it. But, you know, I love using lower octaves when I'm soloing. So that's one. I use an octave fuzz for certain stuff. You know, and some kind of Octavia. There's a few different ones that I like. There's a company called Fuzzrocious that make one called the OC Demon and a company called Dr. No that I kind of, you know, I kind of co-designed with the maker. I'm spacing on his name. I don't know why. I just call him Dr. No. I'm not a big distortion fan. I like overdrive. I like pushing the amp. So I use a way huge green rhino most of the time. And so that's 3.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to pick a 4th, I would have to
what's
say,
the reverb delay thing? Where are you going with that?
Delay thing, and this is something I've been using over the last 4 or 5 years constantly, is a Eventide H9.
Right.
I mean, that does everything. So that would
I
be
think
my.
that's cheating having the H9 at the end because you can just have it's everything. I got to ask you, have you seen and tried? And I'm looking for a colleague to give me the nod. I think it's a brand called. Jack White did this collaboration thing on looked like a Morse code thing, and one pedal did octave up and one did octave down, and the middle one was like a kill switch. It's wicked. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
I've seen it, yeah, and I'm really curious of it because, like I said, I'm a pedal junkie, and I've seen like Mark Motherbaum from Devo doing a demo of it, and I was like, wow, it's really cool.
That is a cool pedal.
It's so Jack. You know, he's got this aesthetic that no one else does, and even down to the way his pedal looks is
it's like it's the proper Morse code thing from like the Second World War. It's so cool.
It's
so cool.
Yeah, I want to try that one out for sure.
And then what's the amp? What gives you the big tones? Is it still a twin or something different now?
So I mean, the one amp, if you're saying I gotta have one, I would, what I've had the most luck with for Queens and every other, band that I kind of play with recently, it's the hand-wired AC30.
Okay.
They're newer. The newer ones that have been out for the last, maybe, they've been around for like 10, 12 years.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
They have that blonde Tullux. I get the best all around, tone from that amplifier. But I usually use that in concert with something else. With my live rig, I have a dry sound and I have a wet sound. So recently I've been playing this amp from there's a company called Echo Park, which is a friend of mine, Gabriel Curry. He makes these really beautiful guitars, and he's a true luthier, but he also makes amplifiers. So he and his amp designer Eric made this amp that's this unicorn Marshall that was sort of in between the Plexi era and the JMP era. It was called everyone called it the Narb because the guy who designed it, his name was Bran, B-R-A. So they called it the Narb. It was just Bran backwards. And so he actually made this, amp. It's a hand-wired Marshall style amp. And I've never been like a huge Marshall guy, but this is the one, And so that's the other amp I would use. He makes a 312 cabinet, which looks
cool.
Amazing. It's like, it looks like those Vox amps that were the bandstand amps,
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the other amp I would use.
Well, I think I can hear that kind of. I think I want to hear it loud as well. I think it's the kind of thing
it's a big sound.
It's a big sound. So, I guess we're coming kind of near to the end of the time we've got now, which is cool, and I've really enjoyed talking about that. But your latest project, then, Gone is Gone.
Yeah.
That sounds like a cool collaboration, and probably the only band in the world where there are two people called Troy in it. So, tell us about how did that come along, and that's quite different to the Queen stuff. That's quite different to the Queen stuff. So, is that like a just another creative outlet for you to do something different?
Certainly is. Yeah. So, I mentioned being on the road earlier, and another perk of when you're on the road touring, playing festivals and or just being in a usually it happens in Europe or the UK, where you run into another band that's also playing the night after you or the night before you. They just happen to come to see your band play. I do that all the time. But that's where initially I met Tony, the drummer, who's from a band called At the Drive-In. And he was playing with an offshoot of that band called Sparta. So this is how incestuous it gets. But anyways, we were on tour together and we hit it off. And over the years, that was probably like 2003 or something. We always talked about doing a project. And so I had time off from Queens in between records, and he gave me a call, and he was doing all this kind of scoring for movie trailers and video games and stuff like that. And of course I love the marriage of sound and vision. For me, everything I want to write on guitar, it's a soundtrack to some movie in my head already. So to me, I love that kind of stuff. So we started working on instrumentals, and his friend Mike Zarin had this company that sort of composed a lot of this stuff. So we were working on all this music, and they were like, it'd be interesting to get somebody to sing on this. And they both were saying that they liked Troy Sanders from Mastodon. And I said, well, it just so happens that I know Troy because we've met on the road too, and we always talked about, he always talked about opening up a bar called Troy's, plural, which is stupid. But we always laughed about doing that and then having some project to do. So I just called him and he was standing in line at the DMV, which is torturous. I don't know if you guys have a DMV.
No.
You don't. The Department of Motor Vehicles. It's the worst line you could ever stand in to get your license. But he answered the call and he jumped right at the chance. So that's kind of how the whole thing started about 5-6 years ago.
Oh, it's a while back. I didn't realize it had been going that long.
Well, that's how it kind of started, and as you can imagine, a band like Mastodon, they are a tireless touring machine. They're a band's band. They tour so much, and so I would say Mastodon tour a lot, Queen's second, and then At the Drive-In is a close third. So it's very hard to schedule stuff. You know what I mean? To get in a room at least and play. Back before the whole world went crazy.
What might you do with that? I mean, I said I've seen some cool stuff on YouTube, and I really, really like the sort of the vibe of that band as well.
Yes, I mean, it's basically it's our project. We call it a project because it'll never tour, and we've managed to play one live show per year.
Right, I get it. So you're very much Queens and Mastodon are the touring, and that's the main gig, and then Gone is Gone is an
opportunity to kind of like explore different things, and different sounds and different gear and different sort of emotions, I guess. So that's what it is. It's definitely a chance to step out of your normal self and then try something different. And so my playing in that band is very it's any opportunity I can make something feel rather than technically show off, So it's a cool project, and our record comes out on the 4th of December.
Oh, cool.
And we're trying to figure out if there's a way we can do any kind of live stream, performances and stuff like everybody else. But I mean, the music is there, and it's also it's a headphone record. You put on the headphones, and it's coming out on vinyl, and it's got this great artwork that has the gatefold and everything. So it reminds me of being a kid and listening to records and looking at the artwork. It's got that vibe.
That's cool, man. Well, I wish you all the best with that. If there's anything we can do to help promote that, if you decide to do the live stream or whatever, and if you do get it on the road and you come to the UK to tour it, or next time you're here with Queens or whatever, just again, let us know. Love to try and do anything we can to spread the word.
I do have plans. Well, we'll see how it goes, but we have plans to do Reading and Leeds with Queens in 2021. So hopefully that will stick. Fingers crossed.
Who knows at the moment? It's on a knife edge, isn't it? Maybe it will. Come on, everybody. Just behave for a few more weeks. We can do this.
Yeah, and I think it really has the one benefit to all this sort of post-apocalyptic world that we're living in is I think everyone appreciates live music now more than ever. I certainly do. I'm dying to either play or see a live show, anything, So, hopefully we'll make it there and everything will be peachy keen.
Yeah, well, amen to that. And look, thank you so much for joining us from your very, very beautiful, I don't know, it was like a roof garden kind of. We didn't get to see the dog. What happened? I thought we were promised the dog.
They snuck back inside. This is just a little outdoor sort of lounge area that I get to take advantage of at this time of year.
Well, it's very nice, and thank you so much. Well, look, have a wonderful day. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and good luck with everything. So, ladies and gentlemen, Troy Van Leeuwen, everyone, round of applause. Thank you very much. Okay, take it easy, man. See you soon.
All right. Good one.